Part 15. Westwood, 11:03 p.m. Unit 1L19 slowly cruised up Sepulveda and turned right onto Massachusetts. The Terminator sat impassively behind the wheel, focusing its twin infrared eye cameras into the darkened shadows of the near-empty street. The cyborg quickly scrutinized the interiors of the cars parked along the curb, flicking its vision into each one, methodically probing for the target. Suddenly, the abstract pattern of static coming from the unit's radio was broken by the calm female voice of the police dispatcher. All units. Suspect vehicle located at parking garage at Colby and LaGrange. Instantly, the Terminator slewed the police cruiser around in the middle of the street, narrowly missing a red Volkswagen Bug loaded with 5 very stoned teenagers on their way home from a Van Halen concert. The VW jumped the curb and smacked headfirst into an old oak, crumpling the front of the VW like tinfoil. "Shit!" the Bug's young driver shouted. He saw the police cruiser tearing away and shouted again, pounding the dash in a fury of frustration. Cops were always fucking you up, and now they had fucked up his beloved Bug. West LA, 11:06 p.m. Reese raised the butt of his Remington 870 and slammed it against the ignition assembly on the Eldorado's steering column. When the lock cylinder broke free on the third impact, he slid the mechanism out between 2 fingers and examined it. Simple. He'd done this kind of thing many times. Reese dropped the key-actuated cylinder onto the floor and reinserted the starter switch into the hole. Giving it a half-twist clockwise brought the rewarding sound of the starter. When it caught, Reese revved the big engine of the Cadillac Eldorado and let it idle, then shut it off. He turned to Sarah. She sat scrunched below the dash level, seemingly dwarfed by the large front seat. They'd left the LTD and skulked together among the parked cars until Reese found this one. Below them, on the first level, half a dozen LAPD cruisers swarmed like bees around the abandoned grey LTD. 2 black and white cruisers went up the ramp to the second level, prowling slowly, flashing their searchlights around, methodically checking every vehicle, moving steadily towards the top of the parking structure. No one noticed when Unit 1L19, driven by someone who was obviously not a cop, glided into the structure and joined with the other cruisers in the search. Reese motioned for Sarah to stay down below the dash as a pair of headlights swept across the row of cars near them. A searchlight stabbed through the windshield of the Eldorado. As Reese and Sarah ducked lower, their positions brought them closer together in a forced intimacy neither one addressed. She felt the warmth of his cheek and the uncomfortable scratch of his beard. The low rumble of the cruiser's engine sounded close, as if it were in the back seat. They huddled together, very still. Then the searchlight flicked away and the sound of the engine faded. "Why me?" Sarah asked quietly. "Why does it want me?" Reese's lips were almost pressed into her ear. When he spoke, his voice was a hoarse whisper. Where to start was the problem. 40 years of history that hadn't happened yet. "There's so much," he said. "Tell me." Reese retreated a few inches. The smell of her hair was distracting him. "There was a war, a few years from now. Nuclear." He gestured with his hand to include the car, the city, the world. "All of this is gone. Everything. Just gone." Sarah knew by the intensity of his eyes that it was true. It had happened, or it would. The sheer finality of the word, gone, combined with Reese's resigned shrug, hit her like a cinder block in the gut. Sarah didn't move. Reese went on, his voice clipped, tinged with a sharp military edge. "There were survivors, here, there. Nobody knew who started it." Reese looked over at her. "It was the machines," he said. "I don't understand." "Defense network computer. New, powerful, hooked into everything. Missiles, defense industry, weapons design, the works. Trusted to run it all. They say it got smart, a new order of intelligence. Then it saw all people as a threat, not just the ones on the other side. Decided our fate in a microsecond. Extermination. Reese paused again. He glanced back over at Sarah, into her eyes. When he spoke again, his voice had lost its edge. A subtle shift had taken place, from dispassionate briefing to personal memory. I didn't see the war. I was born after, in the ruins. Grew up there, starving, hiding from HKs. The what? Sarah asked in a hushed whisper. Hunter-killers. Patrol machines, built in automated factories. Most of us were rounded up by the machines or machine collaborators and put in camps for orderly disposal. Reese pushed back the sleeve of his jacket all the way to the elbow and held his forearm up to Sarah's eyes. She stared in amazement at what she saw there, a 10-digit number etched on the skin. Beneath the digits was a pattern of lines, like the supermarket package barcodes. She tentatively reached out and touched it with her finger. Burned in by laser scan, Reese said flatly. This man huddled beside her had lived and walked in some unimaginable purgatory, a nightmare place where machines marked you for easy identification, like a can of chili, as part of the final solution for Homo sapiens. Some of us were kept alive, to work, loading bodies. The disposal units ran night and day. We were that close to going out forever. He held up a thumb and forefinger, with only the tiniest space between them. Reese rolled down his sleeve and began feeding shells into the Remington. There came a man, a great man, he added reverently, who kept us alive, ragged and half-starving, but alive. We got stronger, and he taught us to fight, to storm the wire of the camps, to smash those metal motherfuckers into junk. He turned it around and brought us back from the brink. His voice became a hoarse whisper, cracking with emotion. She watched him trying to form the words. His name is Connor. John Connor. Your son, Sarah. Your unborn son. Sarah's mind slammed the gate shut, and his last sentence was echoing around in her brain like an explosion. It wasn't true. It couldn't be true. She realized that his hands had wandered to her shoulders and had been holding onto them very tightly for some time. When she opened her eyes, he was still gazing at her. There was so much pain etched in his face, the emotion in his eyes so real, that Sarah felt drawn inexorably towards believing him. But this, it had no meaning or substance for her. Being suddenly the mother of a son who existed in another time and place had no reality. Even the tide of apocalyptic images, civilization shattered, cities crumbling into rivers of molten concrete, even that seemed more reasonable somehow by comparison. Her brain just stalled out, nosed over, and dropped. She could only stare at him, mouth open. No, Sarah said finally. It's not true. It can't be. The rear window of the Eldorado went nova white. Reese spun around and stared into the searchlight for a microsecond. It was coming from a police cruiser. But the thing behind the wheel was not a member of the LAPD. Reese shoved Sarah flat, cramming her into the tiny space under the dash as the rear view exploded inward from the horrendous blast of the Terminator's Spas 12. Frantically, Reese started the Cadillac, and at the same instant throttled the huge engine to life as another shotgun blast tore through the rear window, shearing away the remaining shards. Stray pellets whizzed around the inside of the car, bouncing off the windshield. Sarah threw her arms over her head, closed her eyes, and screamed. Reese slammed the Eldorado into gear, and the car lurched out of its parking space. The Terminator anticipated the target's movement almost as fast as Reese could think them up. The black and white cruiser roared forward, racing along the next aisle parallel to Reese's machine. They were charging towards the exit, almost side by side, on opposite lanes, separated by a row of parked cars. Reese was driving blind, keeping his head below the level of the window. He was up to 45 miles an hour and gaining speed. The ramp loomed closer and closer. The sound of 8 screaming tires and the red line roar of 2 engines echoed wildly around the concrete walls. Reese knew the ramp was only seconds away. He threw a quick scan over the top of the door and saw that the Terminator had pulled ahead, cleared the row of cars, and was now moving in a diagonal course towards him. The barrel of the Terminator's shotgun glided out of the police cruiser's open window, and Reese saw it pointing right at him. Instantly, he dropped back down, and the glass above his head disintegrated. Reese popped up and slammed the .870 barrel across the top of the windowsill next to Sarah, holding it like a pistol. The 12 gauge went off 3 inches from her ear. The shot center punched the Terminator's rear door, and Reese saw that the cyborg was stroking another round. He jerked the wheel, and the big car swerved with an echoing scream towards the cruiser. Reese slammed the heavy Eldorado into the Terminator's car, and both cars locked together, still hurtling towards the exit ramp. The police cruiser, clipping the rear fender of a Chevy pickup truck, was yanked away from the Cadillac and sent spinning in place. Every cop in the building heard the gunshots. Some even caught a glimpse of Reese as he flashed down the exit ramp and jumped onto Colby Avenue. They felt a slight sense of relief and pride when they saw, in the next second, one of their own boys, Unit 1L19, right on his tail. All 16 squad cars quickly converged at the exit. When the Eldorado hit the street, Reese was doing 40 plus. 1 block later, he was pushing 80. Sarah climbed out from under the dash and peered through the empty hole that used to be the rear window. She saw the Terminator fishtailing out of the building, shooting back a comet's tail of sparks. And behind the cyborg, the real police, sirens blasting. Soon, the Terminator was gaining speed, coming up alongside Sarah. Civilian cars around the charging pair lurched and slewed, trying to get the hell out of the way, as the twin juggernauts weaved across all 4 lanes. Another shotgun blast from the Terminator's cruiser tore into the side of the Eldorado. Reese was doing his best E&E, escape and evade, but the Terminator kept blowing holes in the armor-like door and body panels. Finally, Reese just got tired of being shot at. He grabbed the Remington from the floor. "Drive!" he shouted at Sarah, then took his hands off the wheel and turned away. He stuck the shotgun out of the open window, slammed it onto the roof of the Cadillac, and dragged his body out of the opening. Sarah stared at the wheel for a microsecond as the car roared along at 80 plus, and then reflexively seized it in both hands. Reese had set the cruise control, and she couldn't find the switch, so she had no choice but to steer and hope for the best. Reese, halfway out of the window, was aiming the shotgun back across the roof of the car at their pursuer. The Terminator swerved, staying tightly to the Eldorado as Sarah fought to control the hurtling machine. The wind buffeted him as Reese lined up and fired. His first shot blew a hole in the police cruiser's windshield. The second tore into the hood. The Terminator didn't even slow down. The next shot went right into the driver's window, and the cyborg ducked its head, throwing the cruiser up against a cement freeway buttress, gliding along it like an electric train, tossing a wave of hot metal sparks in his wake. Sarah realized with horror that they were not on a main street any longer. They were on a city utility road that ended in an enormous concrete wall. She shouted to Reese, but all she could see of him was from the waist down, and the wind tore her words away long before they reached his ears. The wall roared towards them. Later, she wouldn't even remember doing it, but she grabbed the shift lever and slammed it hard up into reverse with such force that she almost broke her wrist. Reese fired simultaneously as the transmission tore itself into junk and the car's drive wheels locked in a shrieking cloud of smoke. Reese's shot shattered the windshield and drove the Terminator back in the seat, blasted in the shoulder. Stunned, for a split second, he shot past the Eldorado, his vision clearing in time to see the wall. Sarah pulled Reese back inside and cranked the wheel right, sending them into a radical tire-smoking slide. The Eldorado ground to a halt, a foot from the wall. The Terminator hit it, dead on, at 82 miles per hour. The police cruiser folded around the cyborg like a cheap accordion. The Terminator's vision dropped out first. Then all the systems in its microprocessor went offline due to the horrific impact to its hardened chassis. Sarah peered up over the doorframe and saw close to 20 LAPD cruisers pulled up in a semicircle. The officers were squatting down behind the shields of their open car doors, aiming an arsenal of pistols and shotguns at them. Reese lunged for his Remington, but Sarah pushed him back, grabbing his arm. "No, Reese, no! Don't!" she shouted urgently. "They'll kill you!" He stared past her, into the barrels of more weapons than he could hope to silence. Every instinct told him to move, to fight, now. The last thing Reese wanted to do was give up Sarah to the authorities. He wondered if the Terminator was dead. He couldn't see the wreck from where he was. He looked back at Sarah. Her eyes were full of fear and concern. He was surprised when he realized the concern was for him. "Please," she implored. Slowly, Reese let go of his grip on the shotgun. Sarah quickly tossed it out the window. It clattered to the ground and lay still. "All right, you in the Cadillac," an officer shouted. "I want to see your hands, now!" With resignation, Sergeant Kyle Reese raised his hands. A moment later, they were roughly pulled from the car. As they were being handcuffed and led away, two officers approached what was left of Unit 1L19. "I don't believe it," one of them said. "It's empty." What does that mean? Sarah wondered. She saw Reese whip around, suddenly resisting his captors, trying to get a look at the wreckage, to see for himself. In his face was the answer Sarah needed, a grim tightening of the lips that told her it still wasn't over.